Hello, everyone. Welcome to Adventures in Angular, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things Angular related. This show is produced by two companies, Top End Devs and Unvoid. Top End Devs is where we create top end devs to get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. And Unvoid, which provides remote design and software development services on a performance basis. So clients only pay when tasks are delivered and approved. In today's episode, we will talk about NGRX version 17, which, by the way, introduces a fully signal based store. My name is Lucas Paganini. I'm the founder of Unvoid and your host in the podcast. And joining me in today's episode is Armin Vardanian.
Hey everyone.
Subrat Mishra.
Hello.
All right, let's get to it. So, Armin, I understand that you read a lot about this new version of NGRX 17. So, let's just start with a brief introduction of what's new. So, what are the most relevant changes in this new version of NGRX?
Well, I didn't only read a lot about this, I also wrote a lot. I wrote a small application. Actually, I made a Twitter thread on this. I want to just, copy paste the link here. Okay, let's put it in the comments because it has all the source code on which I've tried out. So what I did was I used the new Signal Store to build a, to-do list application. I find it, remarkably easy to, get yourself familiar with new stuff by building such sort of application because it sort of has everything that we need. It has, lists of data, it has HTTP calls, it has modifications and so on. So yeah, I'm pretty impressed. This is a really big step. In NGRX v16, the NGRX team introduced signals overall. So you could not only just select data from the store as observables, but you had the select method, it always returned the observable of whatever data you are selecting. You could also now select the data as signals. There is a select signal method. So in the end of the day, even if you don't like the signal store, but you want to have signals, you can continue using NGRX store, the conventional store, with select signal. So that was already there. It is now, I guess, stable. So feel free to use it in your applications if you want to have NGRX and signals. But of course, the big thing that we now have is a fully signal-based store. It's functional. It's extensible. And it is relatively easier to adopt than, say, NGRX store, like the conventional store. Because there you had the Redux pattern, right? You need to learn some concepts like selectors and reducers. Obviously, if you are an Angular developer who knows signals but who is not familiar with Redux or Flux or whatever, adopting NGRX signals will be way easier for you. And it brings almost all the benefits that you have with NGRX store. Okay. So how it works is that you can create lots of stores. They can be decoupled from each other, or you can couple them. You can provide them on any level of your application that you want. You can have a, I don't know, root level store for global stuff and component level store for whatever this one particular component is doing. Okay. So how you do it, there's a function called create store or create signal store. I'm not sure at this point. Doesn't really matter. And it can receive a bunch of modifications. So you can just create a signal store and pass it the with state function so that you can give it an initial state. And you could be done with that. You now have a signal-based, store, okay, that only has this data. It automatically creates selectors to select the data that you have there, okay. And you provide the data as a plain object, but now you have signals of all that stuff, right? Which is, kind of cool little thing. You don't have to write signal this, signal that all the time. So now you have a store that has data that you can select as signals. Yeah, essentially, you would just do, I don't know, my to-do store dot all to-dos, for example, and you get the array of the signals. Then you can add computed properties derived from, your state, and you're just going to be using the computed function. So it's fairly easy. It gets a callback. In the callback, you have an object that has all your state. Now, whichever signals from your state you use, it will be a computed signal created from those pieces of state. So you can create computed properties there. For instance, in the example that I provided in the Twitter thread, I used a query to search among in the to-do list. So I have the list of all to-dos. I have a query, which is an empty string by default. I have user type something. I have a computed property that selects only the to-dos that are relevant to whatever the user has searched. Okay, and I do it with computed signals, and it works the same way. In the end of the day, in the component where you are using the store, you just get that value as a signal. You don't really care how it works. And you cannot, of course, you cannot rewrite those signals. You cannot set those signals directly, which was the big shtick with um, for example, a conventional store. You could only use actions, right? Reducers to change the state. You couldn't like say, oh, I want this property to be something. You had to create an action. You had to create a reducer. More or less the same is going on here. The third extension that you could do to your store is add methods. There is a with method function, and you can give it an object of methods that you can then call in order to, change your state. And if you want to change the state, you have to use a special function called patch state, which is essentially a small reducer to which you can give the piece of the state you want to change and the new value or the callback to use the previous value and so on. Like in Redux, but a bit shorter, you just call it like patch state. If this method is called patch state, set this new whatever item. You can provide arguments and so on. And the cool thing is that you can also provide like Rx methods. There's literally a function called Rx method. And inside that Rx method function, you can define some asynchronous task like, or for this state modification, what I want to do is, make this HTTP call, get the response, change this, I don't know, property on the store, depending on the response and so on. So yeah, these are kind of like the basics, right? So you can create state, you can create computed state, and you can create methods and also RxJS methods. Okay, so that's the whole idea, and all of that stuff lives in one place. Okay, just create one store here. It works.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I think pretty nice. So one thing coming to my question to my mind, like it, I think suppose someone is already doing NGRX a lot, and now they have on effects, writing effects, writing actions, and all. I think although this will also going to work with older effects and action. Suppose I think as in the thread Twitter thread as well, you have shown the with method will execute whenever there will be any state change, right? You are muted.
I'm sorry. No. The methods are the stuff that you call when you want to change the state.
Mm-hmm.
The computed properties will,
Okay.
re-execute if their
Mm-hmm.
dependent tracked signals changed. Yeah, methods are for, like actions were in Nginx store.
Okay. Okay. So no. My question was, suppose, for example, I want to make a HTTP call to the server, and for that I create actions. Action calls the effect call the HTTP call, get the data, then we call the reducer, then pass the states. So can you just explain a bit like how this thing will work on these scenarios?
Sure, that's what the Rx method is for here. As you noticed, I didn't say anything about actions because you do not have actions in the signal
Hmm.
store.
Yeah.
And this is actually a gripe for me. I like Nginx store. I actually didn't like component store. If anyone has worked with component store, I
Mhm.
mean, it's nice, but I didn't like that it didn't have action. It was not event driven. For example, with one action, I could make a decision tree. I could make something. I could say, oh, this action triggers this lots of stuff and so on. Which to an extent I still can get with methods, but methods are to me like a bit more imperative. Like instead of saying, uh, what would I do with the NGRX stories? I would say, for example, this component has loaded, dispatch event action that this component is loaded. And I don't care who handles it, however. And in the store, I would say, oh, if this component is loaded, here's an effect. I need to fetch this, and that. In this case, I have to be a bit more imperative. I need to write a function that says, I don't know, load data for this component, for example. It's a function that I'm going to call, okay?
Mhm.
And it is going to belong only in one store. So if I want to fetch data in two different stores, I need to call two different methods. Again, of course, what I can do is create just one signal store, a big signal store, and have different methods imported and just converge in one place into one store. I could do that. That's also an approach, not bad. Not a big fan myself, but you could do that. Or you would have to call several methods, which I don't like. So your question about effects, why I'm saying all of this stuff, is that effects now don't exist as effects that were in NGRX store. In NGRX store, effect was just separate entity, just separate
Mhm.
thing that could, like a reducer, react to actions and work with observables, right? It was like a reducer for observables, sort of thing.
Yep.
Here, we don't really have it, but what we have is Rx method. So instead, so for usual methods, for example, if we take a look at my example, for instance, here I have a mark as completed method. This
Mhm.
is a conventional method that just takes an ID of a to-do item, finds it, changed it to completed true, right, and patches it back on the state. So this is a simple synchronous method. But
Mhm.
I also have a load to do's method. Load to do's now here is doing RxJS stuff. It is doing asynchronous stuff. It loads data. And what it does, it uses this function called Rx method. And this is a really cool function because the Rx method essentially creates a function. It itself is a higher order function that works asynchronously. And its argument is the whatever observable you want it to execute. Okay,
Mhm.
so the
Mhm.
cool thing here is that you no longer need to do like switch map, like what you would do with the NGRX effects. You would say actions pipe, I don't know, of type, let's say load to do items, switch map or merge map, and then I would say go to do service, blah blah blah, load and so on, and in the end map to another action, which works fine for me. It's not bad. Where Rx
Mhm.
method is actually simpler, you could just use the pipe function, not the pipe operator. There is a pipe function in the RxJS package, not RxJS/operator, just RxJS. And the pipe function, what it does, it creates a higher order observable if you pass operators to it. So essentially what you say is just execute these operators. And inside I would say, oh, okay, switch map to this HTTP call or whatever. And they also actually added the, well, this one existed previously. It is a custom RGS operator from NGRX called tap response. So you
Mhm.
don't need to like subscribe or map to an action. You could do tap response, and inside you can provide callbacks for error, um, completion, right? And a finalized callback, which would work when, regardless, when it is done, regardless where there has been an error or not. Okay. So
Mhm.
in my example, what it does is that the next callback, it patches the state with the to-dos from the backend, the to-do list. Error does a console error or whatever, however we want to handle the error. And finalize turns the loading boolean to false because
Mhm.
we either completed the call successfully or there was an error, so we no longer need to display a spinner or whatever. So Rx method is essentially what replaces effects. We no longer really have effects here. We have methods that do async stuff with observables, but in the end of the day, they still, have to push it to the signal store via patch state. So yeah, that's about it. Our Rx method is the replacement for effects here. That's the bottom line. Yeah.
Yeah. So here I have one more question. Like, so this with methods will be triggered on instantiation of the store, or how will it trigger? Suppose the in your example load to do, how will you trigger that load
Yeah,
to do?
that's a good question. Either I call it on the instance of the store. So what would
Hmm.
I do? Let's say I made the to-do store, and now I have a to-dos component. Okay, I can provide the store on the to-dos component or wherever. I could provide it in the root. I could provide it in some pod or whatever. Now I inject the store. I have the reference of the store. The store now has all the properties that I defined as signals. So I can say to the store dot, let's say loading, and show spinner or not in the template. And it also contains the methods that I defined there.
Hmm.
So for example, I can write an ng on init method, and there I can call load to do's and just select the signals and use the signals in the template. But there's also cool things. There's also a function called with hooks. So I can define two lifecycle hooks for the store, an onInit method and an onDestroy method. And that's really cool because now I don't even need to define a lifecycle method in the component because the store itself says, well, if the to-do store is initialized and the to-dos are actually coming from the backend, oh, why wait for the component? I mean,
Yeah.
there can be scenarios where I would want to wait for some properties. But let's say the core element of this store is the to-dos, and the to-dos will arrive from the backend anyway. So I can just put that logic in the store itself and say, with hooks function, on init, please, load the to-dos list and patch state and whatever. Essentially, again, in my example, I also use that. I defined the onInit method and just called the load to-dos reactive method that I defined in the with methods function. And that's really cool because you have like different functions with callbacks, but each
Yeah.
function in its callback can use something that was defined in the other callback because you
Hmm.
always get the state as an argument to your callbacks there, and you can just call the store. Sorry, you can just call are the items on the store, the state properties, or you can call some methods to execute stuff. So yeah, you have two scenarios. You either call the method there, which is useful when you are updating something. For example, in the component, I have a button or a checkbox rather next to each to-do item, and when I click on it, it just calls to-do store dot mark as completed to-do.id as an argument. So yeah, that's about it. You have to call it, or you can use hooks to call it, prematurely or after the destruction of the state.
Yeah, pretty cool. I think this will reduce a lot of boilerplate.
Absolutely.
And
Just right now, from top of my head, imagine having some data coming from WebSockets. So what you
Mhm.
could essentially do on the initialization of your store, you can say, okay, establish a socket connection, and please, every time that this socket is emitting something, patch the state with whatever message it sent. And then in the on destroy hook, you could just say, oh, okay, if you destroy it, then let's disconnect the socket. Okay. And now in the component, you have zero idea that this is a web socket or whatever. In the component, you will just say, okay, I have some messages, notifications, I display them. That's it. Super
Mhm.
simple.
Yep, yep. Yeah.
Some other
So this,
things that I saw that are also news in this version 17 are that they are deprecating, or actually, they're not officially deprecating, but they're putting it into maintenance mode, which is NGRX data. And I
Yeah.
thought that was interesting because there's something that I've used extensively in the past. So that was like I
You
must
need,
say that I was a bit afraid when I saw that, I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to migrate a lot of what I have. And I wonder if you, because I haven't seen them suggesting a direct alternative to it. Like, sure, they're migrating to a more signal based approach, but this wouldn't really work for what NGRX data was supposed to do, which is to already provide you a default store created based on like basic crude operations to a particular API. So that's gotta be RxJS because we're doing asynchronous work. So I wonder what would be the recommended approach for that, like for anyone wanting to create a facade between their data stores and API resources, for example.
That's a good question, but I want to highlight something before I answer it. NGRX isn't migrating anywhere. Both the NGRX store and component store and the signal store will continue to be maintained, will continue to be updated. Uh, so essentially, the only thing that we got here, like I wouldn't really connect putting NGRX data into maintenance with signals. I think this was a big thing that was coming all along. And it stems from one thing that I'm now going to say something opinionated, and I want to make clear this is just my opinion. I don't claim to be completely right on this, but I don't think we really need facades for NGRX. Of course, there's been lots of articles from lots of people that I respect, and I think their opinion is very valid. But I, respectfully disagree. For me, you have facades, they would create facades, they would write the selectors there, and in the component they would inject the facade and so on. Uh, I don't agree that this is necessary because for me, NGRX store, for example, if we take the most basic thing like the NGRX store, for me it is already a facade. For instance, it acts as a facade with the fact that it has effects that are essentially decoupled from your component flow. Like you don't call effects directly in your components. Essentially, you have a facade called the store, and it actually just gives you two methods. You select the data and you dispatch actions. And when you dispatch an action, you really have no idea from the component perspective which selected properties would change. Okay, you dispatch an action, which is essentially just an event. If you are doing it correctly, lots of people would do like imperative actions, like they would say, load data, load this, edit this, blah, blah, blah. In reality, what you need to do is you need to create events. Like your component loaded, okay, you dispatch an action that says, I don't know, user profile component loaded. That's it. That's what you tell the world. You say, I'm a component, I'm here, I was loaded, please, whatever. I also need this data. I select this data and I dispatch this action. So it is already a facade. NGRX data for me is sort of a facade of a facade. Okay, it's useful. I mean, I don't. I completely agree that it's useful in the context of like I don't have to single-handedly write out every single CRUD operation method. That's an understandable thing. No disagreement there. But in most enterprise applications, this is like 20-25% of the work. You would still need to define lots of methods. And in the end of the day, you have to keep track of your services that work with the data, right? Make sure your API is a bit, works in the way it is intended. Like imagine having an API that uses a post request to get some data. I mean, that's not unheard of, right? You could have a very big query and it just doesn't fit as a query parameter. So you have to send the body and you need a post request. So those sorts of problems can come up, right, with NGRX data. And NGRX data only solves like 20% of the problems. And it was like not really a problem, but more like boilerplate code. That code still exists, right? You still write out your services. You just sort of make them connected to the store, and you don't directly access the store, but rather use the facade of the facade, right, that you have with NGRX data. So it's not useless, obviously. It's not a bad thing, but it just doesn't, I guess, warrant, like, it's too big of a contract, okay? And that is what now you're experiencing, right, Lucas? Like you think, oh, I have to, refactor this because I have sort of married my state into these services via NGRX data, right? And now, well, they're not deprecating it. At least I think in the foreseeable future. I don't think it will be deprecated in version 18. Okay. They could, however, deprecate it in 20, for instance. I couldn't say much about it, but still, it will be well ahead of time. So there is time to refactor it. I think it would be relatively easy to refactor it to a conventional store, right? Or you could rewrite it into facades, like you write out the facades yourself, so they don't, you know, you have a facade with the same method, and then you can start removing the facades one by one. And you just remove NGRX data, and then you will deal with your facade later, for instance. There is a strategy, I guess, to it.
I don't think it is that simple because, for example, there's one particular thing that NGRX data handles, which is really hard to do manually, like really hard, which is the error handling. For example, you can have a method in your facade exposed using NGRX data that would be like create one, for example. And this is going to return a promise. And what you can do is make it so that if the request to the backend fails, that promise rejects. And if it works, the promise resolves with the data, but it not just resolves with the data, but it also updates the cache that you have. So everything that is listening to that cache also updates. Doing this error throw is much harder without NGRX data. Because if you have like a normal store and you just want to, like, you want to emit the error to as an event so that whoever's listening to the error event can answer to it, but you also want to just throw the error in the method, that is way harder than it looks. And NGRX also does a lot of internal ID creation to connect the error to the event that trigger it. And that's kind of hard to do on your own.
I get that. Of course, it's a concern. I think the main contributor to data being put into maintenance mode was, well, lack of popularity, obviously. Not a lot of people are using. I've never used that. I tried it out once in a pet project, and that was about it. Another significant blow to NGRX data was the introduction of um, feature stores, right? So you could bring reducer, and you could bring, it will automatically generate the selectors, and now you have also create action group. So essentially, what it does, it says, this package provides more freedom, so just NGRX store. Let's just enhance it so the real boilerplate stuff, like selectors that just select some property, like you don't need to be a genius to, do that. That store can handle it automatically. Or if you want to create lots of actions that are connected with each other, okay, here's create action group. You can create lots of actions. And what is happening now, it says, okay, that package was useful, but we're not going to maintain it because one problem it has is it has nowhere else to grow. Like it cannot, predict what other custom methods you want to have, right? So now what you can do is if you are, let's say error handling, like you have this approach, right? What you could do with functional approaches, right, that we have in NGRX, what you could do is you could have a higher order function that just does that. For instance, you have top response now, right? You can just wrap it inside another function, your custom top response. That will always do the same error handling, but you could also, let's say, provide an optional argument of another callback that you want in one specific case with error handling. Okay. So you can write like 5 lines of code to fully customize that function. And the same goes for actions. You have an action group now. You can also, like, actions themselves are just functions. When we call like a create action, it does create an action. What it does, it creates an action creator, which we then need to call to get the actual action object, right? What you can do, you can wrap that function. We did this approach, for example, with ngrx store, but you could do the same with signal store, with component store. What we did, we created a higher order function. It was called, for example, specifically for HTTP. It would create free HTTP actions. It was called create HTTP actions. It would take request model, response model, what we are sending to the server, what we're expecting from the server, and it would give us free actions in a tuple. Now, the error and success function actions had their specific metadata on this object, but I didn't need to define that metadata. So, for example, errors always had something like success false on it. And in the effects, what I would do, I would first get all actions. I would filter out the ones that are related to HTTP with the metadata I put in the action. Okay. Then I would perform, I would see if, okay, this is an error. In case of error, I would call some error handler service to handle that error. Okay. And if it was a success, I would display a message or whatever, and so on. So those are just two effects, global effects, that worked always. So I never actually wrote a single line of duplicate error handling code. Instead, I would say catch error, return observable of this error action that was automatically created for me. I didn't need to define anything. Obviously, this is several lines of code more than not writing any code, but I guess it's less obscure, like what goes on there. Like the function that creates free error actions is fairly simple to explain. You could comment it, you could document it, and then you can document two effects that are handling success and error cases. And essentially that's it. That's what I like about event-driven state management, which we have with ngrx store, which I like. I like that I can say, okay, I want to do something on all HTTP calls, okay? Sort of like an interceptor. Now I would have to do an interceptor. But what if I want to do something on all errors? Like, I don't care every errors. I want a red notification message somewhere on the screen, okay? I would do some other error handlings for some specific cases, but I always want that red thing that says something gone wrong, sorry. I can do that easily with effects, with action-driven, event-driven state management. I can't do that with ngrx data. I can't do that with the signal store. I can't do that because it doesn't have actions. But the cool thing, sorry, I'm talking too long on this question, but we just logically arrived to the other big thing. When I say the signal store is extensible, means that you can write your own functions and use the state and provide it to the signal store creator function, meaning that actually, if you really want to, you can have event-driven stuff. You could do a reducer-driven stuff in a signal store. You can do that by writing your own custom function. I have seen people doing that. I haven't tried it out yet, but it is possible. okay, because it is extensible, and you can wrap pieces of state into functions and use in other stores. Okay, so with Signal Store you can do that. With nginx data, I guess you still had to resort to the manual stuff when it came to custom things. So the benefit was, again, I'm not trying to say it was a bad package. I didn't like it, but it was more of a case like, okay, it will work if I have a table that is purely crude stuff, but in general, this isn't really how world works. It's like 15, 20% of cases, but more complex cases, interconnected models, and so on.
That does make sense. Um, Still, I wish that, for example, all those utilities that you said everyone's gonna have to build, uh, if the people that built NGRX data could do that, that would be way better, of course. But again, I understand it's open source community. We can't really just put that pressure into the maintainers, but it really would be amazing because this migration can be really frustrating, and not every company is going to have professionals that will be able to build all those utilities that NGRX data used to provide. But yeah, I understand, like, NGRX itself never said they would um, continue the development of NGRX data. It was always a project created by other members of the community, not the
Yeah,
official
yeah.
creator and supporter of NGRX. So yeah, that's a good point. Although it was never something that was advertised, so enterprise companies making the decision to use NGRX data didn't knew that the support and continuation of that package would be different from the rest of the NGRX core packages. You know, it's kind of like when you put something in the at Angular scope, you expect it to be supported just like every other package in the Angular scope. So
Yeah,
that's the expectation. If it
yeah.
were like an at ngrx dash community, then okay, you kind of already understand that we're talking about different maintainers, but it was in the ngrx scope, you know, so that was like a huge blow to me, and I'm pretty sure that it would be hard to explain to clients uh, like that it was a good decision in hindsight. I see some developers maybe having some tough conversations with their managers when the managers realize that the package is going to be discontinued. But yeah, another thing that I think would be interesting for us to talk about is component store. Like, there is no direct replacement for component store, but at the same time, like, the signal based store can very easily be used to serve the purposes that the component store was serving. But it is um, interesting that, like, it's a general purpose store, but also it can be used for the specific case of just being a component store. Whereas in the past, we had a specific solution for local component data, which was the component store. So I think that that was an interesting movement too. It simplifies things because you don't have to learn the component store and the general store. You just learn a regular NGRX stores, and then you can apply that in any case you want. But yeah, it would be cool to see it being applied to just local component data, just so that people understand how they could use that for newer components that they're building, and also if they're just going to migrate components that were using component store to it, how that would be done. Uh, so, you guys have anything to say about this component store thing?
Well, component store is not new at all. It's not going to be replaced definitely. I think what NGRX does now, right now, is they sort of cover the entire market of ideas. You want a centralized event-driven state? Okay, use NGRX store. You want class-based store with, you want class-based store with observables, okay, you can use component store, and it will be decentralized. Essentially, the store thing can also be decentralized because you can feature state lazy load feature stores, right? It's just one unified store under the hood. In these other cases, you have different stores that can work with each other with dependency injection, right? If you want fully functional stuff, you can go with signals. You can go with signal store. The cool fact, actually, and I saw it in another tweet, I think by Marco from the NGRX team. I saw that you actually, when you call signal store, it creates a class under the hood because it's an injectable, and you can actually write your signal stores as um, classes. You can extend a class from, you can say with store with this state, your class extends this, and now you just write conventional methods in your class and hooks and so on. And it's pretty cool actually. If you don't like this fully functional nested callback, smallback stuff, you can just extend the basis of your store into a class, and then in the class you can write whatever methods, Rx methods, and so on and so on. And it's actually really cool. So you have essentially four approaches. You can do Redux-based event-driven, you can do component-based RxJS-driven, you can do functional signal-driven, and you can do class-based signal-driven. And if you are really keen about it, if you have the time for that, you can actually do event-driven with signals, either by using select signal on the conventional store or fully, extending the signal store with reducers, actions, and blah, blah. You can do that. It is extensible. So what I think the movement here is more towards like diversity. You have every need you have, like you are developing a small application. Okay, you don't really need a full-blown store selectors, features, blah blah blah. You know signals. You are not very good at RxJS. You don't care about RxJS, and you don't really have many methods uh, talking to the backend. Sure, just drop a signal store, a couple or two. They can work together. You can inject one signal store into another. So you essentially still have one big store if you want to. Okay, if you need something from another store, you can just inject it, use it, and you are up to your work. You don't need to know a bunch of stuff, care about a bunch of stuff, think about scalability. And the fact that you are using these stores, you can always scale up to NGRX store. You can create one centralized store afterwards when your application grows. And then you could say, okay, I would just switch these injected stores in my components to the conventional store and use select signal, and that's it. You're still getting the same data under the hood. From the component perspective, nothing has changed. That's the cool thing. You can have these diverse approaches, pick one which you want, and I guess NGRX data just didn't fit into any one of them.
Yeah, I think this one thing came to my mind. This will also going to help in a lot of micro front end development. Like first you put your signal stores, and then once you finalize, and or you have now multiple micro front end and you want to maintain one store for your application, then like Arman you said, you can go with the bigger store approach rather than micro store approach. So I think this also be possible have multiple store with signal store, like the store will not be related to each other, and you can just share the store in between your components.
It entirely like depends on how you provide your store. If you create a store and provide it at the root, then
Mm-hmm.
your entire application has access to it.
Yeah.
Of course, you can reduplicate. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that's a good approach, but again, you could reduplicate the global store by providing the store in the component. No one really does that, but theoretically you could. I think it's cool that you can just, say, like what I see myself possibly doing is having an event-driven NGRX store for all the stuff, And then each component has its own store, its
Mm-hmm.
own facade, if you will, but it's a signal store that just injects the big store, takes all it needs from it, takes all the component data change stuff, injects it back into the component, and now the component just has to, work with all these things. It's way easier on the unit testing stuff. In the thread that I posted, I also did some unit testing. It's very, very easy to unit test Nginx signal store. So having this sort of interconnection with the big store and small store could work well in terms of unit testing, right?
Yep.
So yeah, you can have multiple store, or you can just have a big root signal store and a small local component store, and you can then choose how you work with it. I would prefer to combine them into one at the component level, and then just use one store and say, I don't know, user profile component under the hood. It actually uses all these other stores, but I don't know it. I don't care about it. I just use whatever data I need for this component, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
unit test whatever I need for this component. And it's easier to mock also, right? You don't need to mock this entire store. You can mock this small one that only uses two things from this store and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, you can both combine, recombine, and so on. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the segregation of responsibility will be good here.
And the components become super simple in this case. Like again, in the thread, in the example, component TypeScript has literally one line of code. It just injects its store, uses it all in the template. It's just a no-brainer to see how it is both good for the readability of the component, for the like all your component logic is expressed in every component, is expressed in the same pattern by using the signal store approach. So your components kind of become more uniform. You can adopt this like an approach. Oh, my components just need to use a signal store for its state every time. It's a bit more code, but we now know all the components, conform to this. We can easily see that and so on. And again, you can just use, component class-based signal stores, which is also
Mm-hmm.
possible,
Yeah.
right?
I like that. Like overall, um, I think it was a really positive addition to
Mm-hmm.
NGRX. I really like the movement of going signal based. I think that's definitely going to. It's already going to simplify things for us that are like uh, old Angular developers, but it's gonna be even easier for newcomers into the framework. So I really like this movement, and yeah, I actually don't think I have anything else to aggregate to this discussion. I think we can start wrapping up. The last thing that I'd like to say is how much I like the functional approach that those libraries are going for. It's not just syntax, it makes it so much easier to really reuse parts of the library because you don't have to like create a base store and then extend it. If you have parts of it that you want to reuse in other stores, even if like you have methods that you want to reuse in other stores, you can just create a function that returns those methods, and then you call that function during the store creation, kind of like with custom methods X, whatever. And then it's going to give you those methods. So I really like how this is going. I think it's much, much, much easier to create reusable code. Um, and yeah, I think developers just need to be cautious not to introduce dependencies that should not be present. It's that saying, copy and paste is better than the wrong abstraction. So you don't want to create wrong dependencies among your code base. But other than that, if you have a particular piece of code that you're repeating among all your stores, then you can just isolate that into functions and reuse that during the creation of all these stores instead of isolating in a base class and having to extend it. So I really like how this is going. Yeah, I think that's mostly it for me. So if you guys don't have anything else to add, I think we can go to promos.
One very, very, very small thing, just if you're working with RX method, make sure that all the operators and all the stuff you import from RxJS, not RxJS/operators. It won't work and you won't know why, because there you are not inside an observable, you are actually creating an observable using the pipe function, not the pipe method. It was a very big pain point for me just doing this small application. I was like, why is this not working? It is literally what is in the official blog post example. Why is it not working? Ah, wait, maybe I need to use the map function rather than a map operator that goes into the pipe method of some observable. So yeah, be careful with that because I think it's customary for us to import that stuff from RxJS/operators, but those are different. Those are functions intended as higher order functions for existing observables rather than just functions that return observables themselves.
Yeah, I think if someone left before this and started doing the code, and it might they might face the same issue and again come to the episode and see after 50 minutes we give you the solution.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get to promos then. So mine's gonna be quick. Just the default. I'm gonna promote Unvoid. So it's unvoid.com. And we provide remote software and design services on a performance basis. So clients only pay after the tests are delivered and approved, which removes every risk that you may have by hiring an outsourcing agency. Also, Unvoid engineers and designers working US time zones, so you also don't have communication issues of like trying to talk to your development team and having to do that at midnight because to them that would be like 10 a.m. or something like that. So these are the kind of things that Unvoid has solved for you while still having an interesting price point. So if you're interested in either outsourcing your project or augmenting your staff, be sure to check out unvoid.com and contact us if you're interested in that. So yeah, this is gonna be my promo for today. Armin, how about you?
Actually, funnily enough, the publication just dropped something for me to promote today. So on the last one, I notified our listeners that I have a book in early access about modern Angular. Sadly, not Angular, but modern Angular. My new book is all about the recent, latest cool features that we have in Angular. So it is in early access. Last week, 3 chapters were published. And today, two more arrived. And actually, one of the chapters is kind of touching on the points that we were discussing today. So one chapter is about the different, small, cool things that we have, like host directives, ng optimized image, input transformations, required inputs, that sort of stuff. And the fifth chapter that dropped today is about RxJS, RxJS interop package, custom operators that we can do, how we combine it with the inject function, and so on. So yeah, let me also put the link to the book. It's in early access, meaning you can buy it with a discount. You can try it out. Oh well, the website is down, but whatever. I will put the link here. Hopefully, it will resolve soon enough. So yeah, if you choose to read the book, hopefully you enjoy it and it is useful to it. Feel free to comment on the live forum about the book. It's still a bit of a work in progress. We're polishing it out. So and yeah, more content to drop soon.
All right. Yeah, feel free to send that in any links that you you'd like people to see in the comments section, because that's going to be sent to everyone that's watching the live stream. All right. I'm just mentioning that because you sent in the chat that is private to just us. All right. How about you, Sabret?
Yeah, I think it's simple for me as well. I would like to promote my YouTube channel. It's Fun of Heuristic. So please guys go ahead and watch that and let me know what you want to see more. Like some people are seeing me do some React videos, but yeah, it depends on how my mood goes there. Yeah. So please go and check Fun of Heuristic.
All right. Okay. I think that's all for today. Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.